On this episode of Still Loading.
Let's go racing! It's Super Mario Kart Funny Car Madness! Only on Super NES! Turn the track into a giant mud pit! Or burn rubber on ice, wood, or asphalt! Fly! Mix it up with the big boys! See Bowser in his Bigfoot-dropping truck! See Yoshi's go-kart really go! Mushrooms, banana peels, turtle shells! Dynamite! Check your rear view and make him eat dust! Or go into battle mode and ruin his day! Too speed! Fast and way too fast! It's two-player fun on the split screen! Only for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System! Now when you're playing with power, superpower!
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this new episode of the Still Loading podcast. I'm your host, Josh Koval, and today on the show, it is the 30th anniversary of one of the most iconic games, and I don't use that word as often as I should for some of the games that I cover, iconic games of all time. We are talking today about Super Mario Kart. It was released in September of 1992, and boy, do I feel old now. Granted, I was only 3 when this came out, but still, I'm old enough that I should have been able to play it at the time, so I don't have a lot of nostalgia for this game, which is why I brought on my guest who did an entire documentary about this game, a nearly 20-minute documentary about the making of Super Mario Kart. With me today is Yahel of Wrestling with Gaming on YouTube. Yahel, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me and making me feel old because I would have been 11 years old when this game came out. So you and your youth can go to hell with your working joints.
Well, you look better than you're in better shape than I am. So I think you're winning the age bracket right here at the very least.
Well, we'll see what my ligaments say.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for joining me, man. I was looking forward to this all week. I really like your YouTube channel. I haven't watched all of your videos, but I've seen your GoldenEye, your Perfect Dark. One, I'll be honest, it's one that I haven't watched yet, but one that I really do want to watch is your one on the Famicom modem, because I'm obsessed with the idea of consoles going online like way earlier than you would ever expect them to.
Yeah.
That's like that bit of information where people who aren't into video games, you go like, did you know the Sega Genesis could go online and you could download games to it? And they're like, are you shitting me?
Yeah. That's like when I tell people about X-Band, and I'm like, yeah, you could play against other Super Nintendo users and you could DM them basically, have like little instant message chats, like match-based, ranked, Jesus, I'm saying that all wrong. Rank-based matchmaking, all the stuff that like Xbox Live launched with, like you could have had it on your Super Nintendo email, on your Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, like hardly anyone knows about it. But yeah, the Famicom modem is really weird like that too, where it was like, yeah, you can play some games online, but it was more for like, you could also do things like bet on horse races,
check your stock too, right?
Yeah, check your stock, trade stock, like what on your... for those that don't know, the Famicom is the Japanese
NES.
Nintendo,
Yep,
8-bit NES. So yeah,
it's just wild.
Crazy. It's an older video, so the production quality is, but the information is accurate. That I will say.
I feel like that's the curse of every content creator, though. You go back to your old stuff and you're just like, not proud of this anymore. I was at the time, but I look back at some of my old episodes. I've actually been redoing some of my old episodes. I made this joke before. Last year, I did an episode on Donkey Kong and the Donkey Kong Classics collection on the NES, because when I originally covered it on the show, I covered that and the original Double Dragon in like 20 minutes. And I'm like, what the like, those are two of the most important games of all time. And I'm like, 20 minutes for both of them. It's fine.
Right.
So eventually I'm going to be redoing Double Dragon as well, but I've yet to get around to that. So we are here though to talk about Super Mario Kart. And before we kind of go and dive into the history of the development, which you covered expertly in your video, so a lot of this information is going to be from his video. Still go watch it. We're not going to necessarily get everything from the video because A, that would kind of defeat the purpose of your work, but also B, why would I just regurgitate everything. Like, I just feel like that would also defeat it's plagiarism at
No.
that point. So we're gonna.
Yeah, and D, it's been so long since I made it, that I don't remember everything about the video. Like, we were saying before we jumped before we started recording, I was like, I had to, like, start rewatching my video just to, like, kinda re-jog my memory because 'cause it's been, like, a year and a
Been
half
a
or so.
while.
Yeah, little while, and I'm, like, one of those people, man, that, like, when I research this stuff, I become, like, the the utmost expert on it for, like, that period of time while I'm researching it and editing the video, putting it all together, and once I'm done with the video, like, it just slowly the information starts just leaving my brain slowly, so but it's okay, I've got my script and my notes up from the video, so I should be good.
All right. And I was just picturing now, like, how weird would it be if you went on a podcast and somebody just read your script word for word to you as you, like, as if it was like, I, well, how, I don't know why, just the idea, like, I could picture that being like a comedy sketch. I would never want to see it in real life, but I think that'd actually be a funny, like, sketch or something like that. Anyway, before we dive into the history, though, let's go with some personal memories of Mario Kart. So let's start off with you, man. What are some of your personal experiences with this game? And I guess to kind of lend into it, to move into the history of it as well, because I don't really have any. Just to kind of throw that out there right now, I don't have a lot of experience with this, so mine will be quick. But what is your personal experience with this, and what kind of made you want to do a video on the history of this game?
Well, this game was, I mean, I think everyone knows that it's, it was a huge seller. It's depending on what list you look at, it's like either the third or fourth best selling game on the Super Nintendo. It sold, I've got my notes right here, over 8 million copies, almost 9 million copies. So,
Mm-hmm.
it was a huge thing and I was the right age for it. I'm 11 years old, almost 12. So my friends and it took, my parents didn't get it for me for a little bit, but a buddy of mine that lived down the street, he had it. And I swear for like a year and a half, we were like playing that thing every day. Uh, friendships were strengthened and destroyed playing that game, I
Much like
think.
Monopoly, yes.
Yeah, much like GoldenEye on N64,
There we
actually,
yeah.
But yeah, we would just play it all the time. I don't know anyone who, at least in that age group, back then, that like played it and didn't love the hell out of it, whether it was racing against each other or doing the battle mode. Yeah, man, it was huge, and that's kind of what made me want to do a video on it. I don't usually cover too many. In fact, maybe I haven't even covered any other like first party Nintendo titles on my channel yet. But I try not to cover Nintendo stuff super often, just to kind of switch things up because Nintendo stuff gets like covered a lot.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, it's the most popular retro gaming thing on the, at least a lot of the retro gaming p- discourse has been geared towards Nintendo, just because that's
yeah,
what so many people had. So yeah,
yeah,
it's good.
which makes
I
sense,
like that you
right?
kind of branch off from that.
Yeah, I mean, and it was something that I'm glad I waited to cover because, with it being something I covered after doing the channel for a few years, I felt like I did it justice, at least more so than I would have covering it early.
Hmm.
But yeah, just my own childhood love and nostalgia for it's the reason why I wanted to cover it. And I ended up, through covering the game, I ended up learning a lot about it and its development. And it's I guess it's a little bit of a known, I don't know, it's almost like a meme now about how like Nintendo, whenever they're like making a first party title, they're worried more about the user experience than the graphics. Like, is it fun? It's
Yes,
paramount
100%.
in their design philosophy. And this game, like in its development, really is so like symbolic of that philosophy that Nintendo has, where this wasn't even like the game they were trying to make. And then it turns out, well, we can't make the game we were trying to make because the Super Nintendo can't handle it. But what can we do to make this fun?
Hmm.
And they spit out a masterpiece, just casually out of a failure,
As
spit
you
out a
do.
masterpiece. Yeah,
They it's true, man. Nintendo is very much a company, a game design company that, or a game developer, excuse me, that no good idea goes to waste. They always find a way to incorporate an idea that they thought was good, even if it's like 20 years later. They will
yeah,
find a way to include it. Like, I mean, even it's a very basic example, but like Yoshi was supposed to be in the original, definitely in Super Mario 3. I can't remember if it was supposed to
I
be
think
in
in
the
Mario
original.
3, yeah, was the
Okay.
original
That's when he was,
idea
yeah.
for him to be
And they
used.
put it out a couple, they waited a couple years later and they put it out in Super Mario, excuse me, in, yeah, Super Mario World. But then you even have stuff like, when I was doing research for Pikmin, I did an episode on Pikmin somewhat recently, and that game originated, like the idea of that started with the 128 Mario tech demo that came out before the GameCube. But the idea of all the different Marios running around on this like cylindrical platform and bouncing around served as the basis of, or served as at least some inspiration to Super Mario Galaxy and kind of how
Right.
the gravity of that whole thing worked. So even in tech demos, man, like Nintendo does not throw out ideas. They find ways to
Yeah.
make their ideas or repurpose their ideas if they can't get it to work in some way, shape, or form at that
Yeah,
time.
and,
And this
I'm
game's a perfect
curious
example
if
of that.
because I feel like that's almost. I always wonder, like, is that a Nintendo thing or is that a Miyamoto thing? Because it seems to be a lot of games where he had served on as either an executive producer or maybe he's the creator or of the IP or something like that. That's where it really tends to happen, where you see like Miyamoto pull back some idea he had, like years ago or whatever. So I
Yeah,
wonder when
yeah.
he's done with Nintendo or has moved on and retires or what have you, if we'll continue to see that kind of stuff. Because I don't think it's a coincidence that it tends to happen in Miyamoto games. Tend to be Miyamoto driven ideas or
The
originated
only
ideas, I should say.
I think you're right. I would agree with that. I wonder if maybe like as he gets up there in age, and he's not like he's not crazy old now, but he is starting to get up there. So I wonder if like as he gets up there, how much his mentorship of the next generation will
Right.
be, like how strong is his mentorship going to be? Like is he going
Yeah.
to really teach them this idea of like saving ideas that may not work now for later?
Right.
It's one of the reasons Nintendo is so tight-lipped about everything development-wise, because they never know if there's like this kernel of a game idea that they could use for somewhere else. They don't want someone to steal it.
Yep.
So I don't know.
And hey, it's
As
been working out all right for them.
yes, just a little, just a little.
They're doing
Switch
okay. They're
selling
doing
over
okay.
100 million units.
Yeah, I guess that's all
Uh,
right.
just oh my goodness. For me with Super Mario Kart though, my personal memories of it are none. But I have one and it's kind of funny. So before I got into retro gaming and before I got into kind of game history and whatnot, like I said, I'm a little bit younger than you. So my first Mario Kart game was Mario Kart 64, which is not surprising for someone my age.
Right.
N64 would have been my big console. But I remember when I first heard that Super Mario Kart was originally a Super Nintendo game, and I went, "What? How? How would they?" Like, is it top down? And when I saw it was, with Mode 7, it was their version of 3D. I went, "Oh, that's kind of cool, actually." It
Mhm.
blew my mind at how they translated that to the Super Nintendo. So my first experience with the game was literally, "What the fuck?" Like I just had no
Yeah.
idea that it
Yeah.
existed, which is kind of a cool thing for in my like as much as it's weird as someone who to be really into video games and be into games that they didn't even grow up with, that's kind of fun for me because then it's like there's always something new. It's not like I got to experience as a
Yeah.
kid. So I like
And I'm
stuff
kind of
like that.
with you in a way. Even though like these games, like Mario Kart, were like more of my era, right? I was like the right
Hmm.
target age group for them. But I'm fascinated by those like sort of pseudo 3D games from the 90s and even like some of the arcade ones from like the late 80s, like the super scalar games and that kind of stuff, where it was like we want to do something in 3D, can't really do 3D. How can we fake it? Like have you ever played the GI Joe arcade game from like 1992?
No, I actually have a buddy of mine on that I met on Instagram who did a whole video series on it, but I haven't watched it yet. But I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's not technically a super scalar game because I think Konami was a developer, but it looks like kind of like a super scalar game where it's
Okay.
like this faux 3D stuff that's coming at you, and it's super well done, and the transitions are ridiculous from like some of the levels where you'll like go underground into a base, and the game's really transitioning into like a different level, and just I don't know, that kind of stuff like really blows me away because they're like now you can, if you have enough time and money, you can do almost whatever you want in your game visually, at least.
Hmm.
There's very, very little that you can't do in a AAA game that you think of, unless you don't have the budget or the personnel or whatever. Back then, man, you're like those limitations were like real. And if you wanted to like figure out a way to do like some fake 3D stuff, you had to like really be smart and creative. And I don't know,
Yeah.
I find that stuff ingenious and impressive.
Do you find things interesting that are like game design techniques or game design concepts that you feel are ahead of the time for like what you can see, like for how you perceive when they came to popularity? So like for the example I like to give to everyone is like Castlevania 2 on the NES. That is
Hmm.
an open world game with a day and night cycle that
Hmm.
has like it depending, it depending on the day and night cycle changes the gameplay around, which now like you see that all the time. Like you look at
Yeah.
like Zelda, like Breath of the Wild, monsters come out, and I mean, you can even go back to Ocarina of Time. The monsters come out at night but they don't come out during the day, stuff like that. But that happened on the NES, and it's an open world game at that. Like you don't when you think of open world, you don't think of that on the NES,
Right.
though. Original Legend of Zelda was an open world game as well. But you get the idea,
Yeah.
like something where there's like this lived in world feeling you don't really think about existing until after the NES or like after the Super Nintendo even. But
Hmm.
there's these inventive concepts that they've existed beforehand, and it's crazy how the game developers had to work around the limitations to find a way to achieve a similar-ish effect. And I always find that interesting. And to bring it back to my question to you, is that what you're kind of talking about, like those game design concepts like that are way ahead of their time or feel ahead of their time?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just stuff that like I mean that GI Joe game, like when I saw that in arcade, I was like, whoa, because I mean it really does a good job of like giving you again, it's a pseudo faux 3D effect. It's not like real 3D like we see here in modern games, but super impressive and mind blowing. Where you're like, wow, why, how, how are they able to do this? Like, I can't think of any modern AAA title I see on PS5 or whatever where I'm like, oh, how did they do this? You know, it's
It's
just like,
like a
oh,
lot
okay,
of
they did.
money.
Yeah, it's like, oh, they did this. I mean, don't get me wrong. A lot of these titles, like, dude, they're obviously very visually impressive, right? So it's not to like disparage those developers or take anything away from them, but no one ever looks at a game now and goes, "How did they do this?" Like a modern game, it's like, oh, okay, they did this.
I think though, just to kind of push back a little bit on that, I think that for people who aren't directly in game design, who aren't directly in game developers, and maybe you have more insight to this than I do, but at least from like a layman like myself with it, like I feel like we grow to appreciate the technical advancements that maybe people in the industry went whoa, like right when it came out. The reason I say that is I think of like the original Last of Us. You look at the original Last of Us on the PS3, it blows me away how good that game still looks, even though it's approaching 10 years old and there's now two different upscaled versions of it.
Yeah,
And there's games with a lot more the consoles have a lot more power than the PS3 did, and
yeah,
a lot better architecture than the PS3 had. Um, but that game still, like, it's impressive to me what they did with the technology at the time, and also like the motion capture technology for the voice actors, like that. As much as that's commonplace now, you look at back at the PS3 era, that was something that was kind of like some games did it, other
yeah,
games did not. And Naughty Dog really kind of pioneered it with their
yeah,
games, or not pioneered, but popularized it at the very least.
yeah.
Maybe pioneered. I
And
don't know. I have to do
you
more
bring up a
research on
good
that.
point, man. No, you bring up a
Like,
good
I
point. And
wonder,
I mean, the last. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I was just going to say, I wonder in like 15 years, will we look back on these PS5 games and be like, holy shit, how did they do that?
Maybe like end of life PS5 games. And the reason why I say that is when you look at The Last of Us on PS3, that was like pretty close to the end of the PS3's life, where like by then, Naughty
Came
Dog in
out the same year,
particular.
I think, as the 4 and Xbox
Yeah, because they
One.
came out on both. Yeah. And by then, like Naughty Dog in particular, and like other like, developers, of similar quality, they had figured out how to get the most out of the PS3. But, I guess part of the reason why I say like these new games, at least from a visual standpoint, I don't think people are gonna like look at them and be like, "How did they do that?" Maybe there'll be some stuff where it's like, "Oh wow, they really managed to squeeze a lot out of this machine,
Mhm.
based on how much video RAM it has or whatever. But the new consoles, they're basically PCs, right? So it's almost like the curtain's kind of been peeled back a bit, where older consoles. In fact, I think was PS3, was that running on a Power PC
I
CPU, or am
don't
I thinking of?
know. What I do know is the PS3 was like had weird architecture because it had like 7 cores, and like
Yeah, it
one
had
of the
some
cores
weird
was
stuff
devoted
going
to the
on with it.
operating system and the other 6 were devoted, and like the
Yeah, yeah, I
GPU
think
had
you're right.
like 4 or 5 cores or something like that. I don't know if it
Yeah,
had
yeah.
power PC
It's
architecture, but it had a weird like higher like structure to it internally.
Yeah, and I might be thinking of the 360. I know, like, one of the it was either the first or the second Xbox. One of them was running off Power PC architecture, but anyways, my point is, like, around the PS3 is kind of like when you start. It's for me, at least. I where you got like those, like, machines that really don't quite feel like PCs. You can see, like, it's on its way, right, to kind of becoming
Mhm.
more and more PC like in terms of its components, but it's still like it's a console with its own weird kind of stuff, going on. Where it's, I don't know, there's more of, for lack of a better word, magic to how did they do that kind of a thing. Um, where I
I
don't know,
could see
I just
that.
think with the newer consoles, because they run on very similar architecture to PCs. Some of the curtains have kind of been pulled back a bit, but I will say what I do think is impressive with some of the newer consoles is what they will implement sometimes in terms of, like, game modes or, like,
Mhm.
scaling difficulties, especially with, like, open world online games and those kind of things.
Yep.
I think that stuff is what we're going to look back and be like, oh wow, that was really impressive, because that stuff's like a little bit. I don't know. It's a little bit more nebulous with how did they do that? How would you go about that? Whereas,
It's
like,
harder
it's
to
like, oh,
pinpoint.
right.
Yeah, I getcha.
Whereas,
I
like,
could
oh,
see
of
that.
course your PS5, game running on a super powerful, CPU and GPU, of course it looks good. Whereas this other stuff is like, oh, how did you implement that?
It's one of those things where I think that's a good point. I know we're way off topic from Super Mario Kart, but I'm liking this conversation right now. Um, the uh, the it's almost like newer consoles, with the exception of the Switch, don't have a personality. Like, and I don't mean that as necessarily a criticism, like, because it just depends on like what your preferences are and all that good stuff. And I genuinely don't mean it as a criticism, but like you look back on like the PS2, for example, and like most highest selling console of all time, though the Switch apparently might have a chance to catch it. Um, Highest selling console of all time, but it was notoriously difficult to develop for. Like, I remember there's a documentary that Naughty Dog put out or Sony put out when they were remastering the Jack and Daxter games for the PS3. And I think the company was Mass Media, or who was the company that was porting it over to the PS3? I can't remember, but they were talking about like the programming for that game was awful. Like, not necessarily like
Mm,
like conceptually bad, but like it was just gaming programming is dirty programming. It's like it just whatever works, you just get it to do. And what they were doing, they were like offloading some of the processing work over to the PS1 CPU, which you weren't supposed to do. So they were like, Naughty Dog kept doing all these things of like trying to balance the workload to be able to pull off the original Jack and Daxter. And you won't really necessarily, I shouldn't say that. It doesn't feel like they will have to do that as much with newer consoles. With that said, I'm not a game dev. I'm sure a game dev could listen to this and be like, "You're
right.
wrong. There's all this
I
other
like I
stuff
like
going on."
if modern vintage gamer listens to this episode, he'll be pulling his beard hairs out. Be like,
Oh,
what?
100%. 100%. So maybe I
Yeah,
should
and I'm
stop
not a
talking
game
right
dev
now with that.
either. I'm just kind of going off what I feel people will think looking back.
Exactly.
I mean,
So if you're listening
uh,
to this modern vintage gamer, not that you know me or you've probably never even heard this show before, but uh, feel free to correct me, and I we can we'll post a correction on the next episode. But let's go into Mario Kart though. So you did. I don't necessarily just want to be like, here, you go tell your whole video, but like we'll just kind of go back and forth with this. I think the first important note to make of this, and I just to kind of boil it down, some of the points you made in your video was one, it was started out as or the conception of it started with as an F-Zero game, right?
yeah. And I will say, and I do kind of give this caveat in the video where there is a little bit of I don't know. Controversy is not the right word, but so basically, there's one interview where Miyamoto says that it didn't start out as an F-Zero, as a player F-Zero game, but literally he's got like a bunch of other interviews, including like the most recent interview he did about Mario Kart I have it in my notes here in 2017, where he said, yeah, the idea was to try and make a two-player F-Zero game on the Super Nintendo. So I assume that the other interview I wasn't able to get a hold of the writers from it is maybe it's something got lost in translation, because I mean it seems, and not only Miyamoto but the other developers that worked on Super Mario Kart said that they were told, hey, try and make a two-player F-Zero game. So yeah, that was what Miyamoto wanted, and it kind of almost initially was kind of like they were trying to like just make a tech demo, like to see like, hey, is this even going to be possible to do a two-player game? And as I mentioned in the video, like one of the things, and I didn't really think about this until I started researching the video, is what makes F-Zero seem so fast is how big the tracks are, because you have on these F-Zero tracks, pretty much every track, I don't think that there's a single one that doesn't do this, has like these long, super long straightaways. And some of these straightaways, I mean, they're practically as long as a Super Mario Kart course, you know? So you have these like huge, huge tracks that lets you have that perception of high speed just because of the way the Mode 7 is like coming towards you and blah, blah, blah. But it's able to do that because the Super Nintendo is able to do that because it's only worried about calculating your position and, a few other racers, and it can control where the other racers are going to go, right? So it doesn't really have to worry about them doing anything weird or unexpected, or rendering two different views of the race, right? So yeah, sorry, I started going on I started just saying my video basically.
No, you're fine. I don't mind if you say your video. I just don't want to be the one to be like, you put all the work into this. I don't want to be the one just regurgitate. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'd feel
It's
really
fine. It's been
shitty
out for a
doing that.
while, so. But like yeah. Okay, like literally an F-Zero track. I just wanted to make sure I had my facts here correct. So some F-Zero tracks, there are over 100 screens in size, whereas Super Mario Karts are like 16 screens. So you're talking about what, like F-Zero tracks are like about eight times like bigger, sometimes more than a Super Mario Kart track. So there's a big difference in the games and what they could do. And one of the things I touch on in my video is that they were originally planning on using the DSP enhancement chip from Pilot Wings, which that chip was, at least in Pilot Wings, it was used to help with extra math calculations. So the idea was like, okay, we'll use that in Super Mario Kart to help with these extra calculations that are going to need to be done for two-player screens. And even that basically didn't help to get it to a playable frame rate, basically.
Yeah. And then because of that, they ended up to make two-player racing with Mode 7 work on the Super Nintendo. They had to pare down the number of screens effectively from over 100 to 16, and that's it.
Yeah.
And that is
and slow
significantly smaller. And what, sorry?
Yeah. And, slow things down, obviously.
Yes.
Mario Kart's quite a bit slower than F-Zero. But yeah, it's one of those things where like the limitations made them go, okay, well, we still want to do a two-player racing game in Mode 7. Well, we can't have it be F-Zero. It can't be about speed anymore, per se. So how do you go about making that fun? Which, it's like Nintendo's like best problem to have, it seems to be, right? Like whenever they run into
limitations are not a limitation for Nintendo.
Yeah. And from there on, they started, and the funny thing is like, even then, like when they start developing the game, they're not saying, okay, we're going to make a Mario themed game. They're just like, okay, well, let's try and make this work. And there's in the leaked, I think it was like the Giga Leak, and there's been some like early prototypes of Mario Kart that have leaked out. And in there you can see like the original generic racing character that they made for, which is just like a guy in a helmet and racing overalls. And that's what they were going with to like start creating the game. And they were like, okay, well, if we can't go fast in this game, we don't want to have these like long straightaways or have like a big part of the track be a straightaway, because it's going to make it obvious that you're not going very fast. So that's why there's so many curves in the tracks.
They
for Mario
condense the
Kart.
tracks a lot because of that. Like it almost feels like
Yep.
they can, since they can only have 16 screens, they weave it all in and out those 16 screens. So it
Exactly.
almost, they get the most out of it versus F-Zero, where it's kind of these giant open circle tracks, and they're not perfect circles, but you get the idea. Like they're
Yeah.
very
Yep.
large. It's
Yeah,
almost
because
like there's
what's
an
the
island in the
shortest
middle of them.
you bring up a great point because what's the shortest point or excuse me, the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, right?
Hmm.
Now, if you take a screen instead of like just going straight across, you got a little curve, you go down like you said. Now you're getting more out of that screen. You're getting more time for the player to go through it and it makes it seem like it's bigger than it really is.
And also by adding all those turns, it completely changes the like what how they have to make the gameplay work, how they have to
Mhm.
design the gameplay around it. Like you were saying, F-Zero, it's a lot of straightaways, and I think this is one of the most important tenets of old, not just Nintendo's game design, but old game design, is that limitations breed creativity, and they always, it does that so often for these old consoles. That's why some of the music is the most iconic things, because they couldn't write the 50-piece orchestra piece that they envisioned in their brain. They were like, I have 4 instruments and I got to figure out how to take that down from 50 to 4. And it's similar with this. Like we can't do 2-player racing the way we want to on with F
Right.
Zero with our current tech limitations. So how can we do that? So what's the bare minimum or what's the max that we could get out of this? All right, we figured
Right.
that out. 16 screens, that's it. All right, now from here, how the hell do we design a game around this limitation? And then they figure it
Right.
out. That's just what they did. And
Yeah.
um they by doing that and kind of focusing more on the gameplay of using items, and instead of making it less about the race itself and more about the um experience of playing with friends, it made it a lot better. And I like the one thing he said in their video. They went to the, oh my gosh, I'm gonna butcher this name,
I know exactly. I want to hear. I want to hear you try to pronounce it. I know exactly what you're talking about, but
Nemuro Sata amusement park. I don't know if I wrote that down correctly. It's
dude, I don't even know if I pronounce it right in the video, but it's the I what I say in the video is the Nemu no Sato because it's
Nemu
like
no. Okay, I
NEMU
couldn't
space
even.
no Sato.
I wrote Nemuno, but the U in Satu looks like an A, so my handwriting is just shit. But
Hey,
so
dude,
yeah, they
I
went.
don't know that I'm pronouncing it right. So, and I know there's at least one Japanese name that I butchered in the video. So, but yeah, they went to that amusement park to ride around in go karts, and just another aside going back to the generic race car driver that's in the some of the prototypes. He's like not driving a go-kart. Although, well, I think that there actually is one sprite with him in a go-kart eventually before they decided to, in a later prototype, before they actually said, okay, let's use Mario characters. But
Mhm.
he's driving like a weird hover looking vehicle. It's not quite like an F-Zero car, but it is kind of like weird and futuristic. And once they say, okay, we're going to use carts, or they say, well, we can't use this hover car thing because people might expect it to go fast. So,
Mhm.
okay, what's a cart that people won't expect to be really fast? Okay, a go kart. So then that's when they decide, okay, let's go to Nemunosato, however it's pronounced. And yeah, it's really cool. Like that's like driving them in person, like was like, oh, you can easily slip, taking a turn too fast, in these things. So we should have drifting in the game. It's cool how like they got so much out of that trip.
And what I love, I feel like this has to be one of the more fun aspects of game design. When you're doing research, you're like, all right, we're gonna go karting for game design. Like, how fun would that?
Right.
I mean, I understand it's not necessarily all fun because you're just having to really focus in and pay attention to, like we talked about, the physics
Yeah.
of what they're doing. But I always think
Right.
back to the stories of, like, I used to watch. I'm a huge Medal of Honor fan, or at least I was growing up. I haven't played them in years. Um, I would watch the behind the scenes stuff of the game developers visiting locations where the game was going to take place, so that way they could have a more authentic feel to it. And I also think of the stories of, like, going back to Naughty Dog with their Uncharted series. They always tried to do like one technically impressive thing within each game. Like the first Uncharted, it was all about water. They really tried to
Hmm.
like figure out a realistic look for water. The second one was sand, because a lot of there's like or no, sorry, the second one was snow and the third one was sand. And they basically like would just go out to a desert and take turns rolling down the sand dunes to see like what happens, how does sand
Hmm.
react when you do that. Like what a weird thing to be like, what are you doing today? Like, oh, I'm gonna go roll down a sand dune so we can make
Right.
it look real. Like, what a
Let me
weird
go study the
job to
physics
have.
of sand. Yeah.
That's
Those little things, make a huge difference,
oh
and
yeah.
that's why Naughty Dog games are the way Naughty Dog games are. Those paying attention to those small details that seem innocuous, but at the same time, like it makes total sense, right? Like if you're having a game where like there's going to be a ton of sand or a ton of water, uh, even though it might, especially historically until recently, like water for a long time in games looked like kind of crappy, right? So if the water would have looked okay or even crappy, players wouldn't have batted an eye at that, right? Because it's like, okay, this is
Hmm.
just what water looks like right now in games.
We're
But
already used to
you
the
know,
standard.
right. But they went above and beyond, and because it's such a recurring thing, like it makes a big difference in the game.
And I always think it's I think back to, when you have to have that attention to detail. So I actually went to school for game design. Um, got only have an associate's in it, so I didn't really get far. Realized I like talking about games more than I like making them. But I remember doing during the 3D class, like learning 3D modeling and stuff. Our teacher was someone who almost got hired by EA for the Madden series, and normally you'd be like, "Wow, that's like a big deal! Like you're going to work on the Madden series." He was going to be in charge of grass. That's it. For 8 hour, for probably, well, not 8 hours. Game developers work a lot longer than that. Well, let's go with the nice version, 40-hour work weeks. Let's say
Oh,
let's
sure.
say game
They're never
development's
asked to work longer than that. Never.
never asked to work longer than 40 hours. 40 hours a week. He is going to be working on grass every day, year after year for each Madden game.
Oof,
So he
that's
was
rough.
like, nope. And he went and found something else. I don't blame him. I wouldn't want to. I understand someone's got to do it, but I wouldn't want to be that person
Yeah.
to do it. Oh,
Yeah,
no,
that's
thank you.
pretty rough. No pun intended.
uh, I was trying to think of another joke, but nothing was coming to me. I was going to make some kind of AstroTurf joke, and just nothing really worked. Um, but okay.
Yeah, it's weird. Like they go and back to the amusement park thing. So it's funny. So they go there, right, to like learn the physics of like how the carts move and all that kind of stuff, and like how to make the gameplay more realistic and like the carts more realistic. But then they end up saying, well, like there's a quote in my video from one of the programmers, where he says that he spent a lot of time studying the physics of the speed, friction, inertia, but that he basically discovered that if he followed like the rules of physics for a cart faithfully, that it didn't even feel like a game per se.
Hmm.
So their approach was then to just tinker with the physics, tinker with the controls, so that it felt fun. And that was kind of one of the things where they're like, okay, let's make this fun over realistic. Not that F-Zero is the most realistic game in the world either,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly, but it's considering the speed you're supposed to be moving at in F-Zero, the physics are a bit more realistic than in Mario Kart for sure.
And then this ties back to what you were saying before, where Nintendo seems to care more about fun than realism. And it's true. Like you look at all of their games and they really prioritize fun over
Yeah.
just about anything else. And that's great. I think it's one of the reasons Nintendo stuff in general, like there's a reason why Nintendo Directs are always so hyped. It's because they
Right.
like, at least there's at least one game a year that Nintendo's going to drop that's going to be like, this is something that I need to play. Like for me, it was the new Kirby game earlier this year, but like, and they just have such a variety of genres under their belt. Like Splatoon 3 is coming out later this year. That's going to be another big seller.
Hmm.
So they just focus on fun, and I think it shows. And you were saying before how they had like that nameless kind of suspenders stripe dude or whatever. Like it
Hmm.
just no one could tell them apart from each other, so they swapped it out. We're like,
Right.
well, let's see if Mario works in this, and then they filled out the rest of the roster with
Right.
different Mario characters, obviously Luigi and Bowser and Peach. And I am so happy they have Donkey Kong Jr. in here, because Donkey Kong
Me
Jr.
too.
does not get his due. He's been erased from Donkey Kong lore. There's conflicting things in Donkey Kong lore between the various Donkey Kong countries as to who really DK Jr. is, because it's not the new Donkey Kong apparently, but at one point in time it was. It's all over the place. So I'm always happy when I see them including DK Jr. in a game. I believe his last appearance in the game was tennis on the Mario Tennis on the Virtual Boy. I think that was like the last time he appeared in a game, like as a playable character.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say as a playable character. Yeah, because he technically has an appearance as a trophy in
like Smash or
oh
something.
Man, I think so. I'm trying to remember what game it is, but and I know this because I didn't want to create a model for him, and I was desperately trying to find a 3D model for him, and the only one that like was recent was like him from like some trophy kind of thing. I was like, well, great, I can't use this. So yeah, it's weird. It's so weird that Nintendo really doesn't do much with them, but
who knows? It's one of those things where I kind of like that he's this obscure character. I don't even have like a strong like nostalgic attachment to DK Jr. I just like the fact that he kind of like is this goofy looking monkey that doesn't really fit in with the rest of the DK universe anymore. In fact, I feel like how weird would it be if they brought him back in his own series? Like you have the Donkey Kong Country games, and then you have Donkey Kong Jr., and it's like some completely different design,
completely different thing.
that would be so Nintendo just to fuck with people, to be like, no, it's not Donkey Kong Country, it's Donkey Kong Jr. I kind of want to see that now.
Completely different. Yeah, and like you were talking, they plop in the Mario. One of the things about them using carts instead of some other kind of vehicle was that a cart shows more of the driver's body. So that was kind of one of the things. And like you were saying, we can't really like tell this generic driver apart from another one outside of making them a different color. Well, what if we pop in Mario? Instantly recognizable even from the back. Okay, well, if Mario's there, well, Yoshi should be there, Luigi should be there, Peach, etc., etc. So you can see how like it was easy to like kind of jump from Mario to like, hey, let's include all his friends and enemies. Although I think the manual says something about like, I want to say, man, I should check this before I even say it, but that the manual says something about like why Bowser's there or something, like that they've put aside their differences, or I can't remember what it is, but there's some reason why they're like buried the hatchet to do these races. I can't remember what it was.
There's always, the enemy of my enemy is my friend or something like that. Maybe there's a common enemy in this. I'm going to actually look up real quick to see if I can find. I'm looking at like a scan of the manual now. I want to see if I can find something in there.
I think there was something about explaining why he's there.
So far it doesn't have much of anything, but once again, you never really know, like unless I'm also skimming through this. I'm not really reading too intently, otherwise it'd be a boring episode just watching me.
And it might have been something, since I didn't put it in the video, it might have been something, because sometimes I'll come across something, and if my kind of rule of thumb is I want 2 to 3 sources for stuff, depending on like what those sources are. I mean, if the source is a video interview with Miyamoto saying something, okay, I don't need to like verify that Miyamoto said this. I'm watching him say it, right?
Yeah.
But other stuff, so it might have been something that maybe I couldn't get verification on. So who knows? Maybe it's not correct, but
I mean, I don't see anything directly. I mean, once again, I'm sure if I read through this, maybe there would be more of a chance. But like the only thing I can find is when they reference Donkey Kong Jr. and Bowser that they have high top speed, but they're slow, but they're heavier drivers.
Yeah,
and so their acceleration isn't as good. These two drivers have long been Mario's arch enemies. They are both rather hefty, so they have slow acceleration, but their top speed is great. Like insert Tony the Tiger or something there. As enemies, look out for Bowser's fireballs and Donkey Kong Jr.'s banana peels. These two really throw their weight around. Stay clear of them. And that's pretty much all that it says.
Since you kind of brought up the items, something that I never realized as a kid, but it totally made sense now when I was like replaying through the game like a lot for this video, is that I somehow as a kid, maybe other people did, I didn't realize that the computer can just like, the CPU opponents can call their weapons at will. Like they don't have to go over a block. Like
Yeah.
Bowser can use as many fireballs as he wants, Donkey can throw as many bananas as he wants. And I never, ever realized that that was the case, that the CPU can just use weapons whenever they want. But they do have like set items, like, Toadstool's always going to have the poison mushroom. He's not going to have the star or something else, So
Yeah.
there is that one caveat to them. But one of the things about like that's kind of like the genius of Miyamoto is like once they realize, okay, we're gonna make this with Mario characters. Well, it shouldn't be a traditional racing game then. Or a even using go-karts, right? He's like, okay, what can we pull in from the Mario universe to throw in here to make it stand out, to make it different? And again, all those like little things that make it not a traditional racing game, again, it makes it so you like don't even think about the speed of the game, the fact that it's not as fast as F-Zero, like all that stuff just like completely takes your attention away from it. Like I never as a kid even ever thought, oh gosh, this game is so slow compared to F-Zero. Like it didn't even like register as a thought.
Yeah. I guess it's just because the design, since they made smaller levels, then it felt a lot more frantic. You're constantly turning, so
Yeah.
you don't have time to get up to those high speeds of F-Zero, even if you wanted to, because there's not
Right.
straightaways that give you
Right.
that
Or
sensation
an
of
object
speed.
might slow you down or whatever, so
Exactly. There's always stuff in the way. I will say now in preparation for this episode, I was playing this on my Super Nintendo Mini in front of my daughter. One of the first this past week, this is a little like on a fun personal note. She's still learning how to speak. She's only a little over, she's like a year and a half, and she suddenly started being able to put two words together in succession. And one of the first times I noticed it was Mario Kart. I'm like, all right, I'm going to
oh
play
wow.
Mario Kart, and she would say Mario Kart. I'm like, where the fuck did that happen or come from? Like, I didn't drop that word in front of her. I promise. I'm a good father. I swear. Um, but yeah, it was. But so playing it, what I was going to say was with these items, especially the ones that kind of sit on the track, like the egg or the banana or um, the poison mushroom. It's really hard for me to kind of gauge your distance to them because of the Mode 7. I understand it's more of like the technology of the time, but I don't know if maybe it's because I'm playing on the Super Nintendo Mini. Maybe it's slightly easier to kind of gauge that distance on CRT. I don't know, with the scan lines and all that good stuff. I don't know, but I found the items a little hard to like be like if they were sitting on the track, it was hard for me to kind of gauge how close I was to them. The ones that are laying flat on the surface, like the coins or the item blocks, those were easy for me to gauge. It was just the ones that were like in the faux 3D. It was really hard for me to gauge. Did you find that for yourself at all, or is it just something you're used to, so
um
it wasn't a thing?
I don't I don't remember feeling like that, but it wouldn't surprise me if maybe it's an issue with because the stuff that's laying flat, it's literally like part of the Mode 7 world, like the
Hmm.
blocks that you run over. That's part of the track itself. So it's going to move just as smoothly as the track is moving, like exactly with it, because it's part of it. Whereas like when something's laying on the track, it's a sprite, so like now they have to do like extra calculations in the math for it. So and maybe with the refresh rate, like you kind of alluded to it with CRTs and stuff, maybe because of like modern refresh rates, maybe it does make that a little weird.
Yeah.
I personally didn't notice it, but I'm not one of those people that's ever like I can't tell the difference between like 60 FPS and 120 FPS. Like I'm not one of those video files. So like for me,
I
I'm just
can't
like,
I
oh, this
can't
is fine.
either. 60 to
Yeah.
120. I can see 30 to 60, but 60 anything above 60 I'm like, I don't know. It's just so fluid at this point I don't care
Yeah.
anymore.
Dude, even sometimes between 30 and 60, I can't tell. And I'm supposed to be some kind of gaming historian. I'm just like, I don't know. This feels fine.
Well, you can be a gaming historian but not a tech historian. There's a difference. Like
Yeah.
not everyone's going to be Corey and Try from My Life in Gaming, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I
Oh, dude, listen, I am glad that I can't really tell the difference because I know like the people that are sensitive to that stuff, it makes a
yeah.
huge difference for them, right? When they go from playing something from 60 FPS to 30 FPS. Like if they're used to playing, I don't know, a PC version of something and the console version was 30 instead of 60, and it makes a big difference for them in their gameplay. So I'm glad I don't have that sensitivity
Same.
because
I'm
that
with
that
you on
seems
that.
sounds like a legit pain in the ass.
I'll be honest, like I will be able to notice the difference sometimes, but it's never something that's like ruined it for me. Like when I was playing
Right.
Last of Us again a year ago for an episode I did a couple years ago, I would the frame rate I noticed it, like it would get choppy at times and just it wasn't quite as smooth as what I saw on PS4, but it never ruined the game for me. It's just something I noticed. So I'm always I feel I don't necessarily feel bad for the people like that, but it does kind of bum me out when it's like I have a friend who won't play a game that I know they will like, but because they tried it once. Perfect example, Final Fantasy VII. I had a bunch of friends that I tried to get into that game, but because I got into it a little bit, like I got it into it around like 2002-ish, 2003,
Hmm.
and by that time PS2 was already out, and Final Seven's graphics don't really hold up all that well. I still like them
Yeah.
more out of nostalgia than anything,
Right.
but it was like pulling teeth trying to get my one friend to play it for the first time. Once he did, he enjoyed it, but it was like he had to really get over that hurdle of the graphics.
Yeah.
Um, and it's not
And I'm
surprising he
sure
was
for
also
like,
the same person that would end up upgrading his PC every 2 years to get the best
yeah, there you
graphics.
go. And I'm sure like it makes a difference in like for those people with like online, competitive games,
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I'm not knocking them. I'm just saying I'm glad I don't have that's not something I have to worry about. Which is nice. Um, but yeah, but getting back to the game, the items for the CPU, that's another thing that was born out of them having like specific items or CPU opponents was another thing born out of the Super Nintendo limitations. With everything that the Super Nintendo had to do, they found that they had issues getting the CPU's AI to use uh, random items correctly, or more, or multiple items correctly, I should say. So, how do you solve that? Okay, you just only teach Luigi how to use, this.
And I think in your video you referenced the guy who was kind of responsible for for the way the power ups are kind of distributed to the players, because one of the things that they do with these power ups is that if you are in a farther back in a race, if you're in a lower place, then it'll give you better items. So that way it'll kind of even it's in the
Right.
game's attempt to even the playing field. So and
Yeah.
the designer for that, the designer who kind of had that idea was Tadashi Sugiyama, and I thought that I didn't know that was something. I mean, at the time it was probably super novel because not too many racing games. I can't think of any other racing games that were like this before this. You know, I'm sure there's other like
Hmm.
there. I believe technically there was other kart racing games in the sense that you were driving and racing a go kart, but when you think of kart racing games, you think of Mario Kart or something of that genre where it's
Yeah.
items and chaos and just it's
Yeah.
not necessarily focused on your ability to race, but your ability to manage your items and determine when is the best time to
Right.
use them and so on and so forth.
Yeah, yeah, exactly, and I think that's one of the things that made Mario Kart so much fun is like you didn't know there was always a chance
Hmm.
almost anyone could win the race, right? Like because of this rubber banding that like Nintendo included, and yeah, like I think in the video I referenced that one of the things is the worse you're doing, especially in the last lap, the more likely you are to get the lightning bolt power up, and that's the one that makes everybody small and like really slow and you can like
Hmm.
literally run over the other characters. So like there's stuff like that that'll happen, and if you're like in first place, and it's especially again if it's closer to the end of the race, you're more likely to get a less powerful item, like maybe a green shell instead of a red shell, or what have
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
And dude, again, as a kid, it never like dawned on me that that's what was going on. And I know some people would be like, well, that's kind of cheating. Like it's not based on as much on your skill. Well, you can't be terrible either and win. It's not like that. And
Yeah.
it's not a simulation game. This game's about having fun with your friends, and a tighter race is always going to be more fun, right? So
Hmm.
I really don't mind that the game kind of cheats a little bit the race, and it goes back to earlier you used the word frantic to describe like the courses because they're curvy and there's an
Hmm.
obstacle in front of you or whatever, right? So it's like instead of using speed to make things frantic, it's using gameplay elements to make the gameplay feel frantic. So this is just another way for them to do it. So yeah, I'm really glad they did it. But yeah, Sugiyama was like, I'm not good at racing games, the guy you were talking about. So I think his quote is something like, so to give me a chance to win, he adjusted like the chance of getting powerful items the further back you are.
Well, I think that was overall smart because, like you said, it's about having fun with your friends. And so, when you have, like, as someone who doesn't like to play games that are any even remotely competitive, because if I think I'm good at a game and then I start doing poorly, I I get really mad and I don't like it's not the fact that I like obviously people don't like getting mad, but I genuinely don't like the person I feel that I am inside. Like
Mm,
even if I don't vocalize my thoughts, I don't like the thoughts that pop into my head like that. So I try to avoid that. And Mario Kart it balances that really well because the whole it's not if you're really good, then you're going to be able to win no matter what. Like that's just the
right.
fact of the matter. So there is some element of skill involved, which is cool, but it at least gives the players like me who may not be as good at the game the feeling of a chance like oh I can still at least come in second or I can at least come like I
Yeah.
can at least place. I'm not going to come in eighth every single time, and you'll get some semblance like some feeling of progress, which is
Yeah.
arguably one of the most important things in any game. Like
Yeah.
no one likes to play a game and feel stuck in the same spot over and over again. You always need to
Right.
feel progress, and I always feel like games that are some of the most fun are the ones that make you feel like you're progressing at a good rate.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Whether
This is the
that's
kind of game
progress in a
that we're
story or
like,
whatnot. Sorry, go on.
yeah, this is the kind of game where like, almost anybody can like on their first or second try have a chance to win,
Hmm.
regardless of most people that they're playing against. I mean, if you master something like power sliding, like dude, there's some videos like on YouTube of video of people like power sliding around these tracks like nothing. You're not gonna beat that person unless you're good. There's
Those
no
are
rubber
speed
banding that's gonna
runners.
let you beat them. Yeah, yeah. So like but this isn't that kind of game. This is the kind of game that I don't know. In some ways, like I know it's not like a Wii U game, but it reminds me of like the philosophy behind a lot of Wii U. I'm sorry, not Wii U games. By behind Wii games, where it was
Hmm.
like just so casual players, casual gamers, or people who aren't even gamers could just pick up and play and have a good time. Regardless of their skill level. So it's kind of that thing.
And they also incorporated something else into this game that isn't just straight up racing. They incorporated battle mode, which is one of the coolest ideas I think. Like for to include in a racing game that I could think of. Like you have you basically the premise of battle mode is that you are going to you have three balloons and you can pick up weapons and you can launch those weapons or projectiles at your friends or CPUs, and you have to pop their balloons. If you pop all three balloons, then that person's out, and the last person in the arena wins. And I like the fact the one thing you brought up in the video was that originally the arenas were just open. There were these big open spaces, and it was disorienting for the players because there was no landmarks for their eyes to be guided to
Right.
or to know where they were at in terms of in relation to the rest of the players in relation to where they were at actually in the arena.
Yeah,
So
and it
they
was,
had to
I guess it
add
was
walls
making
and
people
stuff.
like dizzy too. The people
Yeah.
that like were testing it, it was making them dizzy, which I guess it makes sense, right? Because it's if you take out like the little obstacles and things that they added, like it would just be like almost just a field and then like a repeating background. It would be super disorienting. So I can see how like that can make people dizzy that are susceptible to that
I
stuff.
wonder if it kind of is like you ever like if you're on a long road trip and you look at the road itself and you kind of like your peripheral vision doesn't see the trees or the car anymore. You're just
Hmm.
looking at like the lines, you get nauseous. Um
Yeah,
like I think wonder if it's like kind of that similar sensation.
maybe.
I always find it funny, like the reason why people even get car sick and stuff like that. I was listening to another podcast about this. It's because your body thinks you're poisoned. You like your senses are taking something in where it's like you feel in movement, but your eyes don't see movement. So that's why some people can't read when they're when they're riding in cars because their body feels in motion, but visually all you see is the book and nothing out the sides of the windows or nothing at the windows. So your body thinks you're in motion, but it doesn't see your emotion. So therefore, these two things don't add up. You're poisoned, and they make you throw up because it's
Interesting.
trying to expel the poison. Now, if someone's probably going to link an article, be like, "You're wrong. That's stupid." Blah blah blah. But I found that interesting, and it kind of makes sense to me. But I'm
It kind of
obviously
does make sense.
I'm more than willing to be proven wrong on this, especially
Yeah.
because it's not. I don't know anything. But anyway, Any other thoughts
Yeah.
though on Super Mario Kart? I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Like we've kind of gone through a whole bunch of the backstory
Um,
and like some of the gameplay. Is there other elements that you wanted us to dive into that like or that you were specifically really enjoyed that we didn't really touch on too much?
yeah, maybe let me touch on a couple things that were in the prototypes that didn't make it to the final game, that I thought were interesting or just kind of neat.
Yeah.
We were just talking about battle mode. So initially, rather than and one thing I couldn't really verify is if this was just because they hadn't sorted out the items systems yet, or they were trying just to make battle mode completely different. But
Yeah.
in one of the prototypes, you don't pick up items to use. You actually like just basically have like a fire, like a rapid fire attack that you can use against your opponents. It's definitely not as much fun. I played like a couple of the prototypes for this game, for this video, and
Mhm.
yeah, definitely not as fun. There was also on the tracks, like when you're like the regular race tracks, not battle mode, they had some of the prototypes have like these. I don't know if you've ever seen like the Dunlop. I'm not like a big racing fan, but I think everybody knows about the Dunlop bridge, like the tire bridge. So they kind of
Yes,
had,
yes.
so they kind of had something like that on some of the tracks where it would be like an arch, but it would be like words. Like I remember one of them said Nintendo. I can't remember what the other one said. And I will say, and again, these were prototypes, so but it looked not good. It didn't look great. So maybe that's why they got rid of it or whatever. In the source code, and this came from that big like giga leak that happened in July of 2020. So in the Super Mario Kart source code, at least for one of the prototypes, they had this thing where in the prototype, if you're playing it, it's called hover mode, where
Mhm.
basically you just kind of like more of a slidey version of your of the game controls for your cart, but in the source code it's referred to as F-Zero mode. So I just thought like that was interesting. It's just kind of like another like little tidbit that's kind of pointing where they at least had F-Zero in mind for some stuff. um and I think that's kind of some of the more interesting stuff. I know that there's some like other versions of sprites, like little variations on the way like the characters looked and those kind of things.
Mhm.
For people that maybe want to learn more about it, there's a group called the Super Mario Kart Workshop. You can find them on Twitter. They have a Discord channel, and through their Discord channel, I mean, they've got these guys and girls are making like all kinds of new games, based off the source code, and hacking prototypes. They've been able to restore a lot of the functionality from the prototypes,
That's awesome.
to be playable. Like you can play as the original nameless overall character guy if that's how you want to live your life. But they've got like tons of stuff, and a lot of the discoveries that have been made, like that Dunlop Bridge, like the rapid fire 7 battle mode. It's stuff that they discovered and like they restored. So they're constantly doing stuff, and they were actually very helpful in this video, particularly Mr. L314. But yeah, outside of that, I mean that kind of covers it. It was super well received, critically and financially. If you go back and look at the reviews from magazines, everybody was super impressed with the Mode 7 graphics, which was still like pretty novel. This is 92, so
Only
still
like
pretty
2
early
years
on.
after it got launched in North America, right?
Yeah, I
Did
think
it launch in
so.
North America in 91 or
Well,
90?
I think it launched in 91 in North America, and Japan was 90. I don't know. I know we could
Um,
easily look that up, but point
I'll
is,
look it up real quick so that way we don't get called out on it.
yeah, yeah. Point is, we're not deep into the Super Nintendo's life cycle here. So
No,
Mode
not
7
at
is
all.
still pretty novel, you know?
90 in Japan,
Um,
91 in North America.
See, that's knew it.
There we go.
Now I'm real confident, right? Now that you verified.
Knew it all
Uh,
along.
yeah, and there ended up being like a bunch of Super Mario Kart knockoffs. And did you ever play any of those, like BC Racers or
No, I
Konami's
mean,
Crazy
there
Racers?
no, I mean, the only ones I came close to were ones that were more knockoffs of Super Mario 64 or sorry, Mario Kart 64. So like
Mm,
Crash Team Racing, which a lot of people argue is better than a lot of fans of Crash Team Racing, I should
yeah,
say,
yeah,
argue is better than. I don't have a preference. I haven't played all of them. Diddy Kong Racing, obviously,
yeah.
and then Naughty Dog's other kart racer, Jack X Racing.
Mhm.
I'm still waiting on that Uncharted racer, Naughty Dog. I'm just saying.
I'll say this: like, I recently played When I say recent, I mean maybe like a year, not long after I put out this video, so maybe like a little less than a year and a half ago. But for the first time, I played Atari Karts, which is the Atari Jaguar ripoff Super Mario Kart, and people like to say that this
Oh
is one of the
God.
best Jaguar games, and I gotta tell you, this is atrocious. This game is terrible,
Oof.
terrible. And
And if
I don't
that's
know.
one of the
I got
best, who
the
knows what the rest are?
well, I've played every single Atari Jaguar cartridge game.
Oh, you
Uh,
poor soul.
yeah, I got the not all the way through, but I got the Atari Game Drive when it came out a while back, and for the express purpose of like playing through all the games. And ooh, it's I genuinely think, and I know maybe people are gonna say, "Who am I to say this?" Being the guy known for leading
The
the
seat.
CDI cult,
Yeah.
but I think the Jaguar might be the worst console I've ever played. Like as far as the library goes, and that's not to say it doesn't have like good games here and there, because it does have like a few good games. But I mean, the majority of these games are so overwhelmingly bad. Like most of them feel like beta prototypes or something, to be like terrible, god awful. Anyways, I'm sure the dozens of Jaguar fans are gonna crucify me
The
now.
dozens. The Jaguar is interesting though, man. Atari's like last forays into the console market, with the exception of like their Atari whatever that they released a year or two ago. Like I found super interesting. I was telling you off mic, I did that episode on the 3DO on I guessed it on another show. And one of the crazy things, like in doing research for that, is two of the like the co-developers and co-founders of the 3DO company, RJ Michael and Dave Needle, if I'm remembering
Hmm.
his name correctly,
Yeah.
they made the Atari Lynx. And
Yep.
so it's so surreal. Like I had no idea. Like I knew Trip Hawkins, like, he created EA, and so I already understood the importance of his legacy. But the other two creators, I'm like, they worked at Amiga. One of them was I think there's a third guy, Rob, not Robert. I don't remember his name now. Dave. It's another Dave. I can't remember what his last name is. Morris. He was the co-founder of Amiga, and then the other RJ Michael and Dave Needle worked at Amiga, and then they
Yeah, and I
would
think it
move
might
on.
be McCall for his last name, RJ's last name. I think it's been a
Macau.
while since I
Okay,
did my video, but I mean, he's not listening. He'll be
I
fine.
forgot you did a video on the 3D. You know all this stuff. Why am I telling you all?
But dude, I did this video like years and years ago. But hey, listeners might not know about this stuff because I mean, I didn't know till I researched the 3DO and I was like, wow, these guys worked on this
Yeah,
and
it's
the
one of
links, which
those.
I like the links. The links is cool.
That's something I've been wanting to add to my collection, but I have not gotten around to it now. Unfortunately, because the retro game market has exploded, it's just
It's obscene.
it'll go down eventually. I know it will, because as people lose interest with it and realize that they don't want it, it's going to go down. But there's certain elements that are just going to be up there for a while, and I'm afraid I
Yeah.
don't know how much a Lynx goes for now, but I'm pretty sure it's a little bit higher than what it used to be. So I don't know.
Yeah. It seems like Game Gears are at least coming down because I was just at Retro World Expo a couple of weeks ago and I saw like a working Game Gears being sold for 75 to $100,
Game
which
Gears are being sold that much.
yeah. Oh, dude,
I paid
I had seen.
$5 for mine like 7 years
Damn,
ago.
dude, like pre-COVID, I remember seeing one at a con for like 150.
What?
Yeah.
Wow. That
And I'm
is
not an expert on Game Gear
wild.
prices, but like $75 was the lowest I can remember seeing for a Game Gear in a long time. But I'm talking about like one, it had everything, with it and
Oh,
it
okay.
worked well.
That makes a little bit more sense. I mine was just the Game Gear, and it he's like, I don't know if this works or not. I'm like, $5, I'll take a chance on that. Why not? It needed the capacitor replaced, which I paid some guy to fix, but other than that, like it
Dude,
works.
I got my Atari Jaguar for like $30 because
Wow.
the the guy that sold it thought it was off Amazon of all places. The seller was saying that it didn't work. And I was just like, well, I know a lot of people that work on restoring consoles. I'm like, maybe I can sort of fix this. Let me just buy it. Anyways, long story short, and I didn't know this either, but with the Jaguar, basically, like if you don't have a game in it, the circuit isn't completed, so it won't turn on. So the guy was just trying to hit the power button, and the light wasn't lighting up red.
Whoa.
And the Jaguar also has like a weird power adapter you have to use. There are like generic versions of it, but it has I can't remember the deal with it, but you have to like find a specific kind. Anyways, yeah, once I got those, I bought the power adapter and I bought like Cybermorph for like $5 or something off eBay to test it out, after a buddy told me like, well, did you try it with a game? I'm like, no. He's like, well, it won't turn on without a game in it, and boop, fired right up. So for those of you
That's
that
awesome.
are looking to get a Jaguar, God bless you.
Jaguar.
Make sure there's a game in it, and good luck with the rest of your life. If these are the decisions you're making, get a CDI instead. More expensive, but you'll get more joy out of it.
Now, real quick before we wrap this up, I actually was just curious about this for you. How did you get into to give a little bit more background onto your YouTube channel? This is kind of a way to kind of plug your show, and also you mentioned off mic another podcast, so we'll kind of get into all that now.
Sure.
How did you get into kind of like game history and retro game like research like this, and kind of the inspiration for starting your YouTube channel?
So I mean, there's a couple things I have been watching. I mean, obviously, like I played, games like pretty much my whole life. The only kind of consoles I would say I missed out on when they were out was like the N64 and PS1. I had a PS1, but like I rarely touched it. I was more interested
Yeah.
in like girls at that point, like my hormones were in
Mhm.
full swing, at that point. So I was like 16 or something. But I ended up coming back to it, and I ended up finding Gaming Historian. Like I don't know, man, really early when he was doing his stuff. Like he maybe had been doing it for a year or two, so it was like real early when he started doing it. And I was just became fascinated with video game history, and then years and years later, I learned about this thing called the God, what was it called? It's my first video, Bleem, and which was a
Yes.
thing that let you play like on your Dreamcast, play PlayStation games. There was a PC version of it too, and a Mac version as well, and they played better on the Dreamcast than they played on the PS1, which is crazy. But anyway, and I was just looking for like a video about it, and I couldn't find a good video about it. And I'm like, so I start researching stuff. I'm like, why don't I make a video about it? And that was really all it was. Like, why don't I make a video? And the only stuff I had been doing on YouTube at that point was I was playing, I would just get drunk and do these Let's Plays of the worst sexually deviant visual novels I could find. Just for like shits and giggles, dude. I ended up having to delete them off my channel because of the adpocalypse. Like I never like monetized them or anything. And it was like stuff I was constantly having to like censor like what was on there. Obviously, I can never live stream these games, but it
Yeah,
was just like
no.
dumb fun, like it was just getting drunk and having fun and just like being outraged, like not outraged, but just being like shocked by some of this stuff in those games.
Mhm.
And then I make that first video, and it's pretty well received, the Bleem video. And I'm like, well, let me do another one. And then I think the second one I did was the Game Boy camera video, which I told you off camera. I've actually unlisted it because I'm redoing it. And it just kind of went from there. I really enjoyed doing it. Um, and eventually somebody commented something like on one of my videos, hey, your your documentaries are really well done, but maybe you should think about getting rid of some of these sex games if you want people to take you seriously. Anyways, I still kept them on there up until the apocalypse. I used to have my wrestling matches on there too, and then I took those down. But and then eventually I got like more and more into kind of like the video production of it and trying to really, like you and I were talking off camera, and I don't have a problem saying this publicly. A lot of retro gaming channels in particular, the videos are like glorified slideshows visually.
Mhm.
And there's nothing wrong with that. Like I was telling you off camera, some of my favorite gaming channels, that's really all they do visually. Some of them do even less than that. If a video, to me, a good gaming video, especially in the retro gaming scene, if the information is correct and if it's well written, then and the audio isn't terrible, that's the one thing that's like an
Mhm.
immediate turn off to me. If you've got like peaking audio or something, okay, I
Yep.
can't. But
It's
if the
tough. Yeah.
if the visual presentation's not something like super fancy, I don't really care. But when I make my videos, for whatever reason, I care. And so yeah, I got really into like doing like stuff in After Effects and doing stuff like motorized sliders and that kind of stuff. And then eventually, and I always wanted to do 3D stuff in my videos, basically just because of Stray Fox. I don't know if you've ever watched his stuff, but like his CG work is like amazing. His videos are amazing. They're beautiful. They're well written.
Mhm.
So I really wanted to like learn how to do that and incorporate into my videos. And so eventually I did, but I always tell people like, I don't know, because people will hit me up now and be like, hey, which is a big compliment. They'll be like, hey, what programs are you using? How do you recommend I start like getting to 3D modeling and animation and blah, blah, blah. And I'll tell them, I'll answer their questions as best as I can, whatever it is. But I always tell them, but hey, I don't really know what I'm doing. I have no idea what the fuck I'm doing. Like, dude, this Mario Kart video. So the 3D models that I made of the carts themselves,
Mm-hmm.
it took me something like 2 weeks, and it's not even like a complex model. I just didn't know what I was doing. So like I'm learning everything on the fly. Like almost
Yeah,
all the
yeah.
CGs, all the 3D stuff in my videos, like 99% of the time, that's the first time I've done that. You know, whether like I don't know. I know that you've done some 3D modeling. I don't know. I use mostly Cinema 4D, but getting like the tires to like turn at the rotate at the proper speed based on how fast the cart was going. I didn't know how to do that. That was like another week of learning something called Espresso, which is like a mini programming language in Cinema
Oh wow.
4D.
Okay, yeah.
Like, why am I wasting my time with that? That's just a terrible idea.
No one's gonna notice the wheels not moving at the right speed.
You're 100% right. No one, no, you know how many comments I've gotten on the wheels moving correctly? Zero. No one
Well,
notices.
maybe you'll get some now.
Maybe,
Maybe
but
after
you know
this,
what?
me and this is not to just diminish you listeners, but me and my like 80 listeners will like uh give leave a bunch of comments on how sexy those wheels look.
Maybe, but you know what? I would notice, and it's like you with your podcast, like you were talking earlier about your James Bond series that you're working on, and how it's something you're really passionate about, and how you spend like hours and hours, like 3 hours recording it, and then even more hours, editing it because you
Yeah,
want it to
that was
be
a lot of
the
work.
best you can present, right?
Hmm.
So like I just try to make my stuff like stand out visually, not because those other channels like there's anything wrong with them. I'm big fans of them. I don't really want to name one. I don't want somebody to like take it as some kind of insult, or like I'm
Yeah, no,
disparaging
I
them.
wouldn't name one either. Just so
Yeah.
it's not misconstrued.
But yeah, that's kind of how I ended up getting back to your original question. That's kind of how I ended up getting into this stuff. And one thing that's been really cool is I've been fortunate enough to become friends with a lot of the creators and channels that I looked up to, like Norm. Like we're friends now. Actually, he's in the Mario Kart video.
He
He reads a
is.
couple of the quotes for me. And I've done some stuff with him, and we were hanging out at Retro World Expo. And like the My Life in Gaming guys, Corey in particular, like I'm friendly with him and some other people. So like that's been like really cool, and to see like what their points of view are when they're creating something. And I'm sure for you, like since you've been doing the podcast and stuff, you've probably like done the same. You've met other podcasters, you guys share best practices, and that stuff is almost sometimes as rewarding, if not more rewarding in some ways than the actual end
You
product.
you've developed a kinship with someone based off of this is going to sound over dramatic, but like a mutual trauma is not the right word for that, because that
Yeah.
would imply, but like the work that goes into it, a mutual hardship, that's a better way. Trauma is very dramatic, but a mutual hardship
Yeah.
of like the difficulties of content creation depending on the medium of content.
Yeah.
Like connecting with other YouTubers has got to be a lot of fun, because not only can you trade like techniques of how you edit and how you do animation and all this other stuff, but it's also just like, man, doesn't it fucking suck for blah 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 blah, like whatever, like
Yeah,
whether
dude.
it's a comment thing, whether it's like this shared interest and this shared hardship that just kind of brings
Yeah.
you together. And it's the same thing for like podcasters and I like. The reason I do podcasting, I was telling you off mic, is like I don't have the energy to do the amount of work that it requires for video production. I interviewed Try and Corey from My Life in Gaming. I said the same thing. I'm like, the amount of like, so I have some old YouTube videos on some other channel. They're like, they're not any good, but I would do these little action shorts and I would put like muzzle flares, and you can actually see a progression of how the muzzle flares get better as I learn more After Effects stuff and
Mhm.
whatnot. And I would shoot for like 6 hours setting up all these shots, and we had like a shitty like camcorder. It wasn't like a DSLR or anything like that. It's like one
Yeah.
of those like little like zoom like square rectangle
Oh,
cameras or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah, yeah.
Um, and we would film with that, and we would film for like 6 hours or so. Like, it would be like, it wouldn't be 6 hours of film, but it'd be like the process of
Yeah.
doing it
No,
all
I get it. I get it.
6 hours, and then the final product was like 4 minutes, and that's without the time spending to edit. Like, obviously, then you add like a couple
Yeah.
hours of sifting through all the footage, and those were just little action shorts. You made an like your videos are like the in the top line of your most recently released videos, you have the shortest one is 10 minutes. Like, I'm gonna estimate that was at least 4 hours of filming, at least. Probably
Depends
longer
on
than
the
that, in all
video, but
honesty.
yeah, it depends on the
Um,
video. But what video was that? Do you know offhand?
how the FBI invaded arcades. That's the shortest one, just on the top
Oh,
list.
yeah, yeah, that's my
I'm
shortest
not
recent
listing
video.
all.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, that video, I mean, the on-camera stuff, yeah, with setup and everything was probably like, not quite 4 hours. That one was maybe like a few hours of filming on camera stuff, but all the CG stuff like took forever
Mhm.
because I decided to use volumetric fog for whatever reason to make the arcade look smoky. Guess what, dude? My first time doing it. And, I'm learning how to optimize my renders for that kind of stuff as I'm doing it. And I didn't realize it would dramatically increase my render times the way it did. So I came to regret that decision. But yeah, and then obviously like had to like model all the cabinets and anytime like there's like those cabinets have a lot of well, they all have like a TV, quote unquote, inside of it. And I was
Mhm.
like, well, I want the TVs to emit light properly, and I want that to like reflect accurately, against like the sideboards of the cabinets, and blah 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 blah. And I want the carpet to have like I have to create the right bump map for that, and no one like really, you can barely see the carpet, but to me it was like I need the bump map to be just right for this stupid carpet. So stuff like that, but and like like in the beginning of it, I made a three. There's in the beginning of it, there's like a 3D version of the FBI's logo, and
Mhm.
it's literally in one shot. It's in there for like, I don't know, 5-7 seconds tops. I don't use it again, and I spent like days creating that, like that model because I'm the slowest modeler in the world because I don't know what I'm doing.
But the more practice you get, the more efficient you'll get at it too.
Right, but then what ends up happening is, like the better you get at least in my case, the better I get, like whether it's video editing, doing motion graphics or CG stuff, the longer it takes me because then I want to do more. It's like, okay, well, yeah, I can do this, and this part of it real quick, but oh, with this extra time, I'd like to try this out, like the stupid volumetric fog. I'm like, oh, I really want it to be kind of smoky in here a little bit, have a little bit of that, like early on in my CG stuff, like my TVs didn't emit light. I
Okay.
didn't know how to do it. I didn't know like that was a thing. Well, I mean, I knew it was a thing, but I didn't know like how I could do it. So stuff like that, man. But yeah, I don't know. Like in a way, sometimes like these days, like I enjoy the editing more than the research. And in the
I can
beginning, I
understand
definitely
that.
enjoyed the research more, but yeah, like because the research is kind of like what it is, and I've done some like I wouldn't say crazy stuff, but like I've kind of gone probably above and beyond what I should have in the research a few times. Like I drove 2 hours to go to a library that had one article. This is for my Game Shark video, to because this library, I knew that they had the article because I could see, or this newspaper clipping, because they had it referenced on their website, but they didn't have a scan of it or it wasn't accessible. And I
Mhm.
really wanted it to confirm something about an office that like Daytel had, not Daytel, Interact had running in Lake Mary, Florida. So I like drove 2 hours, dude, to like go into this library for like 20 minutes, verify what this newspaper said. Okay, let me scan it. Okay, now I can go home. Like just stuff
Did
like
it have
that.
what you were looking for?
Thank God it did. I would have been
Okay, I was gonna
pissed.
say.
I would have been pissed. But yeah, man. But I know you didn't ask this, but like I get asked questions like for people that are starting new channels, like what my advice to them would be. And I know it sounds generic, and I would assume you would give the same advice to somebody starting a podcast. You need to have fun, with it, and
Mhm.
make sure it's something you enjoy, and don't count on it. Like if you're going into it, at least in my opinion, like to make money, you're probably not going to be successful, or you're at least going to be not as happy as you could be doing it. You know,
Yes,
um,
100%.
if you're doing if you're doing it expecting to get views or listens, you're probably not going to be happy for a while, because it's a marathon, not a race with this stuff.
You have to strike lightning to get those views early on.
Yeah. And the other piece of advice I would give to people is try to make evergreen content as often as possible. By that I mean, if you only cover topical stuff, like, okay, this game that was released last week, or the gaming news of the week, or whatever. Well, after a week or two, like, people really don't have a lot of reason to go back and watch those older videos, right? It's past, or maybe things have changed and now that information is outdated. So, just try to cover. And I'm not saying there's something wrong with covering those topics, so that you shouldn't if that's what you want to do, but try to
Mhm.
think of a way that you can make your content evergreen, so that there's value to it for people to come back to. Like, it's not about getting people to come back in the sense because you want the views. I mean, even though that is ultimately what you want, right? But
Yeah.
it's like, what kind of value is someone going to get if they go watch an older video, kind of a thing.
It's a weird balance that I feel content creators like have to deal with, where it's like you want to do this because you like doing it, but at the same time, if no one's watching it, then you lose motivation more quickly. It's a weird combination of like, I'm
Yeah.
doing this because I love it, and as much as you would like to say, like, I would do this regardless of anyone view watched it or listened to it, and that's probably true, but you probably wouldn't do it as frequently or as hard. You probably wouldn't work as hard at what you're doing if it wasn't for the audience.
Right.
I thank my audience all the time, because one of the reasons I even went harder into Patreon and started doing more stuff on Patreon is because one person subscribed at the $5 level for the bonus content. One person, and I was like, oh fuck, I gotta actually do something now. Like, like, someone likes what I do enough that, like, I gotta figure this out. And then I started figuring out, and now I'm doing, instead of two bonus shows every month for the $5 level, it's now two bonus shows. And I'm calling it Still Bonding is the name of the show. Just
Oh,
dumb pun
that's
of still loading.
great, dude.
Yeah.
No, that's good.
uh
That's good, man. That's good.
So that now there's three shows coming out for that. And so I'm like, well, even if it's only for like two people, they like what I do enough to give me money just to support me, even if it's just something small. So I'm like, you know what?
Yeah.
I gotta start doing, so it's stuff like that. Like, the support really does mean a lot. It's not even
Yeah.
just like the emotional, like, it's not even just when people come up to you. Like, this hasn't happened to me because my show's still pretty small, relatively speaking, where like people come up and say how much their stuff means to you. I always hear that other YouTubers and content creators get that, but like, if that were to happen to me, I would love that. But that would definitely push me forward. But it's just the support that I get that really, like, for me, I'm like, I got to keep doing this, not just only because I want to, but like, I really want to do this because people like what I do, and that makes me want to do it more. But not
Yeah.
necessarily, it doesn't necessarily dictate the content itself, like what the content of the content, if that makes sense.
Right.
It's more just like the drive to continue to make
Yeah.
whatever I may find interesting.
But,
And
I'm sure that there probably is somebody out there. I mean, I'm sure more than one person that, really, your content, means something to them, and maybe it helps them get through their days or whatever. And you just never know. Like, if you don't mind, I'll share like two real quick stories.
no, by all
The,
means,
for me,
dude,
the
we got
most
plenty of time.
so the most rewarding video I ever made for me was the X-Band video, where it's like
Hmm.
it's more of a like traditional documentary where I interviewed the actual developers and blah 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 blah. I spent like 10 months working on it. I then posted a video for 10 months, and I ended up with like 18 hours worth of interviews from the developers, another like 15 hours with like users of X-Band.
Wow.
It was ridiculous. I mean, I also haven't posted a video now for like eight 8 months, but that was mostly related to like some health issues I had with tendonitis, which I had had for a long time. But I actually made it so much worse working on my last video that I posted, the Perfect Dark video, because I did something like I worked on it for like 18 hours straight to finish it in time
Oof.
for a sponsorship. And I mean, that wasn't the only thing. Like my job, I'm an analyst, I'm typing all day. Anyways, but it's finally better. I'm working on new stuff now, but I digress. So what ended up happening though was with that video, these people that were on Xband that had played against other people, they started finding the video, and they started leaving in the comments, "Oh my god, I loved Xband. This was my username, yada yada. I was in XYZ clan." And then inevitably somebody would comment back eventually, "Hey, I remember you. You used to play MK2 all the time. This was my whatever." And like people started like
Wow.
reconnecting, and like two people, unbeknownst to me, started dating. Or I guess they used, excuse me, they used to like be like little boyfriend and girlfriend when they were like, I don't know, 12 years old or whatever on Xband or however old
Yeah.
they were. Now they reconnected as adults, got married because I released that like over 2 years ago at this point, and they have a kid. And they came to me at the convention that I was just at a couple of weeks ago
Really?
with their freaking baby, and I don't even like kids. I was like touched. I was like, whoa. So you just never know what your content's gonna do,
That's
and
wild.
yeah, yeah. So you just never know, dude, like how your stuff is affecting people. I've had like a few people like say, "Hey, when I'm having a bad time, I put on this video because it gives me, I wouldn't even say it's because it's my video. It's more like the nostalgia they have for whatever the topic is,
Yeah.
but
Oh,
they
yeah,
like the
no.
presentation, enough to like
Mhm.
rewatch it. And when they're depressed, they'll throw that on. It's like their comfort food or whatever. And like that means way more than like, getting a million views on a video or something like that.
Yes, I 100%. I 100%. Like I said, my podcast is still relatively small, but it's gotten to a point now where it's just like seeing, unless it's like an insanely high number on a specific episode, I'm just like, oh, it's nice that people like, I'm genuinely happy that people are listening. But it yeah, there has been a few listeners that have contacted me just like saying they really like what I do, and like
That's cool, man.
they're they it's cool. It's not been like it makes me happy to see that. There's one that comes to mind, but I don't want to share it specifically just because I'd feel weird giving out too much of their details. I don't know.
Sure, sure.
Um, but for me, when I suggest people go into content creation, like if they want to, it kind of like what you said, manage your expectations in a little bit, not necessarily in terms of your popularity and that, like that's going to happen. Like I feel like most people realize they probably aren't going to hit, like Game Grumps levels of like gaming
Right, right,
content, or like Scott the Waz or something like that. Like most
right.
people don't hit those things unless it's like a lightning strike, lightning in a bottle, and they just get
Yeah,
lucky out of the blue with it. Um, but what I usually try to say more or less is scheduling is scheduling is, I think, is the hardest thing. At least it was for me. For me, it was the hardest trying to be consistent with content. And video production, it's even harder because whenever you see like YouTubers who release weekly content, I almost, depending on the type of content it is, i.e.
sure.
like the
Yeah.
completionist or something like that, they hire editors. They hire editors and
Yeah, he's got like a team.
artists. Yeah, they have a team, and they have to, because in order to make content that's produced as well as that is, um, do like your stuff, like to do what you do on your own and do this type of content in a week, you would need a very large team to, maybe not large, but you would need a team 100%,
Yeah,
someone to
yeah,
handle the art and the CG, and then probably maybe even someone writing the script, like depending on how, like that kind of a
yeah. Or
thing.
helping
It's
with research, or I'd probably want a
exactly.
render farm also for like to
Hmm.
render the stuff faster. So yeah,
It's stuff like that. And so what I always tell people is like, make an episode. Don't plan on releasing it. Make whatever it is, whether it's a podcast of YouTube, like whatever content you're trying to make one thing and see how long it takes you to do it. See how much you enjoy doing it as well, but see how long it takes you to do it, and then try to picture being able to, or how can you compress that, and if not, that's your frequency. Like for me, I tried to go weekly, sucked at it, started doing, was on and off for 3 years of the podcast. Like I would go 9 months without an episode, which is even more of a no-no than it is in YouTube. You
yeah,
have to go weekly, you have to almost be weekly for podcasts. And then about 3 years in, I was like, all right, let me try to go every other week. And so then I did every other week for about 2 to 3 years as well. And then 2020, I decided, I'm like, all right, it's the 20th anniversary of the PS2. I'm going to go weekly for the summer and call it the summer of PS2 and do a different
Mm.
episode on a PS2 game. And that was like the way I taught myself how to do weekly content for podcasts. So like now, like this is actually like what we're recording tonight is going to go out on September 25th. This is actually like a short turnaround time for me. I like to record at least 1 week more in advance than this just because
Mm.
of scheduling. Like, everyone's lives are so busy. Like, I don't know if we planned this tonight and then you something comes up for you, I'm not going to be like mad, but I also don't want to be like shit out of luck. So I plan things so far in advance so that way
Sure.
if something comes up, we can either reschedule or I can just sub it in with some other episode. So I always tell people scheduling is so important. Like if you want to get into this, frequency is important regardless of what that frequency is. Is it once a month? Is it once every 2 weeks? Is it once a week? Whatever you're doing, you want to come up with some frequency so that way you can hold yourself accountable and you're constantly improving on what you're doing. That's
Yeah.
what I always tell people. And then obviously like, don't expect to get big. Like I've developed a following over years, but my podcast is 8 years old now. Like it took 8 years and really
Yeah.
only going hard for about like 4. So it all depends.
Yeah.
Maybe 5 years. I don't remember.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, my channel is, I mean, as far as like the the video game videos, I started doing them in like November of 2016, if I remember correctly. So, I mean,
mhm.
it's coming up on 6 years. And I just now earlier this year like hit the 100,000 subscriber mark. It just takes time. What I will say is, and I'm just kind of like now learning about the podcast stuff. So like we were only like I think we're like maybe like 60 something episodes in. So we've been doing it like over a year, once a week, pretty consistently. But it's, it can be so different from the YouTube stuff where, like you
Mhm.
were alluding to with podcasts, you really need to be like super consistent with a schedule because people have that expectation. And people will always say that you have to do the same thing with YouTube. You have to like put out weekly, you have to put it out the same day, the same time. I
Nah.
In my experience, that's not true. And the YouTube brand managers that I've spoken with that work at YouTube, they say like that's not true either. That's not what the algorithm is looking at. Like each video is kind of treated as its own thing and its own bubble. Now, don't get me
Mhm.
wrong. Your subscribers, if you are dropping a video every Monday at 10 in the morning, okay, yeah, they'll get used to that over time. But that's not what determines whether or not the algorithm is going to organically push your videos to like other people or something like that. Like when I
Mhm.
took 10 months off, I assumed when I came back with my X-Men video, it's going to be dead in the water. And it ended up, I don't know what it's at now, but last I looked, it was like at 500 something thousand views. So
530K according to what I see here.
yeah, there you go. So you just like never know. Like I generally like take 2 to 3 months between videos on the regular, and for the most part, they tend to like do pretty well no matter what. And yeah, man, like it's just more like about your content. Honestly, if it's good or not, and I would say like you have to really learn to look at if you really want to make this like a thing that you do and be quote unquote successful at it. And I don't that means different things to different people, of course, but
Yeah.
in the traditional, I have a lot of downloads, or I have a lot of views, or I have a lot of subs. You need to like be very critically objective with yourself. And you want to take in what people say in the comments in terms of like their criticism, but you also need to like think about like I constantly get criticized or I shouldn't say constantly, but a video doesn't go by where somebody doesn't complain about me having background music in my videos. And I know it's mixed well, so I know I know that's not the problem. I used to do music production, but they might say complain, oh, I couldn't hear or whatever. But I wish you didn't have background music, but it's something I like. And this is my channel. So sometimes you want to hold on to some stuff. You don't want to just do everything necessarily that other people
Exactly.
want because it is your thing. Now, if it becomes your business, and you're doing it full time, which I'm hoping to go full time next year, then you might need to kind of look a little bit more at those people, kind of like almost like customers, right? Where you want to maybe
Yeah.
be a little bit more accommodating. But yeah, my the best advice I would give to somebody is do not get into CG modeling for your videos. It's don't do it.
I mean, if you really wanna make it big on the YouTube algorithm, just be one of those drama YouTubers and just talk about every little I hate drama YouTubers. Not them themselves. I
But
don't
you know
know
what?
any
There's
drama
so many
YouTubers
of them.
personally.
I feel like it's so oversaturated, man. Like, I
I
I, I
just
think that
can't
stuff is
do
like
it.
so ridiculous. However, I do have to admit, I have a guilty pleasure of there's like a group of and there seems to be like a new one every few weeks of these like retro gaming. These channels are like drama slash retro gaming channels.
Yeah.
And when it's like one of those channels and it's ran by like a middle-aged man, and I'm a middle-aged man myself, but if it's ran by like, some 45-year-old guy and he's just having like the weirdest high school beef with like another like 43-year-old guy, like over, I don't know, Splatoon or whatever. Like, whatever dumb shit they get into, like, and they will get into the dumbest, most petty stuff. And I'll like follow them on Twitter and just watch like them quibble back and forth. But like to your point though, these channels though, they don't really like grow. Like very few of them do.
I could
Uh
I could see
because
that. And
it's so
maybe that idea wasn't a
oversaturated.
good idea.
So it's so that's oversaturated. Like just like the angry gamer, kind of being like
Yeah.
an angry gaming personality, like you can't really like break into that genre now.
I
Like it's
mean, AVGN has that down on lock. Like, I mean, I still remember there was the irate gamer. I'm like, are you serious right now?
dude, he's
Like,
still
it's
around.
not
He
even
did a he AVGN was on did an episode with him last year, I think.
really.
Yeah, it was pretty neat. I mean, I'm not a big fan of the irate gamer guy, but he's still like doing his thing.
That's cool,
And
man. More power to him. Then he found a niche and he pushed it through.
listen, if you're doing it as long as he's been doing it, and he's not doing it
Yeah,
like to make a living off of it, like it's got to be that he enjoys it. And it's got to be something he authentically is putting out. What he, the kind of content he wants to put out. So whether or not I like it or not is relevant. I still have to respect that. You know.
yeah. No, it's yeah. If he's doing it, and if he's doing it because he likes to do it, then by all means,
Yeah.
that's just crazy. I had no idea he was still going.
From what I remember, and I may be wrong, but the video that he did with the AVGN, and AVGN is in the irate gamer video from what I remember. It's like very kind of tongue in cheek and like about irate gamer supposedly copying him and all this stuff. So like the guy's like obviously self aware and seems to have a good sense of humor about all the criticisms he gets. So hey, I mean I'm not a fan of the it's just not my bag, but I
Yeah, no,
respect
no.
what he's doing.
Well, it's the same. Like, I don't like. I've said it before. Gaming news podcasts aren't my cup of tea because usually they get their news from IGN or some other news source. So I'm like, well,
Yeah,
if I
Kotaku or
like
something,
it,
yeah.
and so what those podcasts sell themselves on more or less is their personalities. And I'm sure
Right.
they're wonderful people, but it's like there's only so many personalities you can intake and intake in content on a daily, weekly basis. So it's just
Yeah,
one of those things where I just don't choose to seek that out because I can get the news from somewhere else. And unless I really like the types of topics that you like, because there's some news shows that will cover stuff that I don't see others do, and I'm like, oh, I didn't know about this. Then I find that interesting. But
yeah.
yeah, no, it's content creation's wild thing. We should actually wrap this up. I would love to continue
Yeah,
this
we actually probably
conversation,
should.
but we should wrap up the episode. We're going almost. It's funny, listeners. We were talking off mic about how like, all right, we're gonna stop, around 9 o'clock, and now it's like 9:45. We're still
Yeah,
going.
oops. But
No,
hey,
I
it's
don't.
been a fun conversation, so,
It's been
it's all good.
fun. So final thoughts on Super Mario Kart?
It's okay. No, I'm just
It's
kidding.
okay.
It's alright.
It's fine.
No,
It's only one of those
uh,
critically acclaimed games of all time,
yeah.
and spawned a whole genre. But it's fine.
Yeah, no bigs. No, I played it a lot, like I said earlier, for the video, and for me, it holds up. Like, one of the funnest things I did on one of my live streams was after I put out the video, and it got added to the Super Nintendo, to the Switch Online Super Nintendo thing or whatever. Was I played it with like viewers? I was like, okay, here's my code or whatever, and like the game still holds up, man, and it's still fun to
Yeah,
play. It's fun to watch people play. So yeah, just a really fun, cool game. And the last thing I do want to say about its development is it was just made by like 8 people. Like that's it. And
that's nuts to think about.
And, I get it. It's a 2D 16-bit game, right? It's not going to be as complicated as like a modern game, right? So it's not going to require as many people, but that's still, even for 92, that's still kind of a small team, especially when you consider the impact and the longevity that it's had, spawning this like, franchise for Nintendo.
It can't really be put into words how important the game ended up being for not just game history, but also just for Nintendo. And it also was kind of like one of the first forays Nintendo had into the whole like, let's take all of our characters and lump them into one game for fun.
Right, right.
I don't know if it was the first, but it's one of the first where they're like, let's take games because like Donkey Kong, it counts because it was this is
Yeah.
before Donkey Kong Country, so he was still technically a Mario character.
Yeah.
But
And you have other
it's
games before this where like it's like a Mario character doing something outside the usual, like Dr.
mhm,
Mario or whatever. So I mean, but
yes,
yeah, like you said, I mean, this is as long as I can remember, definitely one of the earliest examples though of just taking them out of the typical Mario, platforming kind of situation and put them in something
and grouping them
together
all
and something
together.
different.
And it just it spawned the Mario Kart series, which is always consistently for Nintendo one of the highest selling. It has some of the highest attach rates to their consoles out of
Yeah.
any game. I mean, isn't Mario Kart 8 like the highest selling game for the Switch still? Like even I believe
Well,
what game was Animal
so
Crossing was close to passing it, but maybe it did, but I believe
so I
for a
think the deal with
while
it is
it was
I
like
think they were
close.
looked
I don't know.
I think it might be overall sales because wasn't it released? Because I think it was like combining like Wii U sales and Switch sales because it was on the Wii U as well, right?
Mario Kart 8 Deluxe specifically has sold 46.82 million units,
Oh, there you
according
go.
to
Yeah,
Wikipedia. That's deluxe,
that's
so
insane.
that's not even the original. So it's not including
Right.
the original
Yes, that
version
would be
of it.
Switch
And
alone. Yeah.
Animal Crossing New Horizons came close ish, 39.38 million. So just a little over 7 million apart. It's still
Damn.
crazy, but yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it spawned one of their most profitable franchises, one of the franchises that they consistently try to innovate with. And Mario Kart 8 is arguably one of the best, if not the best in the series. I know
Yeah.
it depends on the person. Of course, it's all personal
Sure.
preference, but
Well, dude, like I know like
it,
one of the most recent directs, there was a lot of like anticipation and hype over Nintendo. People thought or expected and hoped for Nintendo to announce a new Mario Kart in the next game of the series, and like it didn't happen.
mhm.
And the disappointment on Twitter was palpable. So,
Yes, it
it's something
was.
like you said, yeah, it's always going to sell like gangbusters for sure.
So that will do it for this episode. That's a good place to leave this off. After, I mean, we went all over the place, but this was a great conversation, man. I'm so thankful that I got to have you on the show and get to kind of know you through recording this. So is there anything that you would like to promote? Obviously, your YouTube channel, but you mentioned off mic you have a podcast. So just kind of
Oh
promote
yeah.
yourself. Where can the listeners find you and whatnot?
Yeah. So if you want to find my channel, it's just search for Wrestling with Gaming on YouTube. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I do. When I'm working on videos, I do post updates there, like work in progress CG models. I'll usually like upload little clips too that are in progress, and that's at Wrestles Gaming. Wait, is that my Twitter? Let me double check real quick. Yeah, it's at Wrestles Gaming. Okay. But the I do a podcast also. My buddy and I that I went to wrestling school with and I was in bands with, Steve, we have a podcast called Obscurity Now. You can find it, wherever you find podcasts. Basically, it's not gaming related, but we do occasionally cover games. Like we've covered the CDI's Thunder in Paradise game, which is like a game based off like this Hulk Hogan TV show that was created by the people that made Baywatch. And the game is like
What?
it's hilarious. The game, yeah, the game's like unintentionally hilarious. Hulk Hogan, like he knows he's not a great actor, and he knows that he's in a hammy production, and he hams it up. And like
That's
JT,
fantastic.
and there's a ton of FMV in it, and you play as freaking JT from Step by Step. So
Okay.
it's weird. It's weird. But we covered like Scottie Pippen's FMV game on the Sega CD. I can't remember what it's called right now. But we mostly cover like TV, obscure or forgotten like TV shows, movies, and comics. We covered Mantis, which is like some 90s show. We covered Marker, which was like one of the first UPN TV shows. We had something called like the Summer of Image, where we covered like all the #1 Image comic books that came out in that first run of the original Image creators, like Jim Lee, Mark Silvestri, etc. Rob Liefeld, which I told you off Mike, that he got like mad at us over nothing, that he like misunderstood or misinterpreted. We did make fun of him a few times, but I think he was mad because like there was at the end of the first issue of Youngblood, I point out that like it's like a 3-panel shot with one and then like one big splash behind it. But if you look at it, like basically he only drew really each character once, and they're just repositioned. And like the other panels, like they literally just copied and pasted and made some of them bigger, some of them smaller, but they're exactly drawn the same. Like if you superimpose them over each other, it's the same drawing. So it was just like him being lazy. I think that's what he got mad about and assumed like the whole thing was shitting on him, which it really wasn't at all. But anyway, so yeah, it's called Obscurity now. We have a good time. I think last week we covered Duckman. This coming Sunday, which we stream it live on YouTube at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific, but it's also available to download if you don't want to do the video podcast. And this coming week, we are covering something called Little Hercules. Have you ever heard of Little Hercules?
I don't know if I have.
It's like a cheap, I haven't watched it yet, but I mean, I've seen clips from it, and it's like a cheap B movie kind of a thing made, I think like maybe mid 2000s, but Hulk Hogan is
2009,
as, like,
Little
Zeus.
Hercules in 3D.
Yeah. And like Hulk Hogan, I think, plays Zeus in it, and it looks just fucking dreadful. So I'm looking forward to covering it. I get The Room type vibes from it.
Yeah, like Elliot Gould is in it. Wow, Judd Nelson is in it too.
Yeah,
that's nuts. You ever
maybe
heard
not his
this
proudest
is
work?
One real quick thing. Will you ever cover Hulk Hogan's classic song, Beach Patrol or whatever it is?
Oh my god, dude, that whole album is ridiculous. I know exactly what you're talking about, where it's like,
Yeah.
whoop, there it is. Something. Yeah. It has that horrible like line about here comes my girlfriend, or here comes some woman is like saying, oh, here comes my boyfriend, and that's when Hulk Hogan jumps in rapping.
That's insane.
We wouldn't be able to do a whole like episode about that, but maybe we can do like crappy wrestling albums in general and cover a bunch of them.
That would be pretty cool, actually. But all right. For myself, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at StillLoadingPod on all of them. If you want to email me, you can email me stillloadingcontact@gmail.com. If you want to support the show, you can do that in a number of ways. You can give it a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts or whichever podcasting app you use, because that helps more people find the show, and it makes me feel warm and fuzzy, and I like feeling warm and fuzzy. You can also support it monetarily by going to patreon.com/stillloadingpod. For just $1 a month, you'll get the episodes a few days early at a higher bit rate, as well as access to a patron-exclusive Discord. For the $5 level, you'll get all of that plus 2 bonus episodes a month, and at the time of this being released, the first Still Bonding episode will be out. It is going to be covering Dr. No, the first James Bond movie. My friend Erica from the Monster Madness podcast and we are going through every James Bond movie 1 month at a time, 1 movie at a time. So the first episode was 2 hours and 45 minutes. So it's a lot of content for your $5 there. But the most important shout out is the Bit by Bit Foundation. The Bit by Bit Foundation is a nonprofit organization whose mission is to put video games and video game consoles in the hands of kids receiving inpatient care at hospitals. So if you want to support them, go to bitbybitfoundation.org and consider donating. And that will do it for this episode of Still Loading. Yahel, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, yeah. It was, thanks for asking me to be on. It was really fun. And hopefully we'll have you on Obscurity now to discuss Captain N in the future.
Sounds like a plan to me, man. And thank you all for listening. That will do it for this week. And I will see you all next time.